I'm not quite sure when historical parody novels became a thing, but regardless of when it happened, it would seem that writer Seth Grahame-Smith would have that market cornered. In 2009, he wrote Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and a year later wrote Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, the latter of which got a film adaptation in 2012, and despite its weak box office returns, was an awesome time at the movies. Despite the lack of an audience for that film, Lionsgate are pulling the trigger on a film version of his first parody book, and have actually thrown quite a bit of money and prestige behind it. As for Jane Austen's original 1813 book, it suffers the exact same problem as most 19th century fiction, in that it's around 200 pages longer than it needs to be. Back then, authors were paid per page, so they had a financial incentive to elongate their stories to ludicrous proportions, i.e. Wuthering Heights and Les Miserables, so a zombie apocalypse could definitely spice things up. But is this movie just for gorehounds and zombie lovers who couldn't care for classic literature, or is there something here for devoted Austen fans? Pride and Prejudice and Zombies follows the beats of Jane Austen's original text relatively closely, except there's a zombie apocalypse happening. It's 19th century England, and after a zombie outbreak, presumed to have been imported to England via the French, London has been walled off, leaving the upper class society protected by a huge moat, with only one bridge serving as a means of getting across to prevent the risk of further infection. In the midst of all of this, Colonel Darcy is a professional zombie killer, and the Bennet sisters, Elizabeth, Jane, Kitty, Lydia and Mary, are trained in the deadly art, but are being pushed into marriage by an overbearing mother. But the zombies are growing in number and intelligence, and with the four horsemen of the apocalypse sighted, can Darcy and the Bennets find their hearts while also protecting their brains? Now, having read the book Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter by Seth Grahame-Smith, who also co-wrote that movie's screenplay with Simon Kinberg, and recently Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, I have no doubt that despite his schlocky output, Grahame-Smith is an incredibly smart guy who is clearly well-read, with a dry wit. The joke of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was the fact that it doesn't acknowledge the joke and plays it completely seriously, while also incorporating real historical events as a backdrop and finding a way to add supernatural elements. The same has happened here, except instead of history, it's with classic fiction. Until the last 20 minutes, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies has the same plot as Jane Austen's book, and often lifts entire dialogue exchanges and changes the context, which makes them incredibly funny. Straightforward girl talk between the Bennet sisters now takes place as they beat each other half to death whilst doing combat training. Jane getting caught in the rain and catching a cold in the original novel is now treated more seriously in this film because her family don't know if her illness is a sign of infection, and the confrontation between Elizabeth and Darcy concerning a marriage proposal is now an incredibly elaborate hand-to-hand combat sequence which destroys most of the furniture in the room and is one of the funniest action beats I have seen since Anchorman: The Legend Continues. Regardless of your opinion on these Grahame-Smith novels and their film adaptations, you have to at least respect the amount of world building they do by making weaponry and technology in response to the supernatural threats plausible in this time period. The movie opens with Darcy on a routine job trying to find a reported zombie in a wealthy household, but he needs to be inspected inside a huge iron lung, though made from wood, to check for infection. He has flies that are drawn to dead flesh that he uses to find zombies who may be hiding in a crowd, etc. The title sequence lays out the immediate history of this alternative world in an entertaining and efficient way, right down to the upper class receiving zombie self-defense combat training in Japan, whereas the lower class received it in China. For a movie that is called Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, way more thought has been given to this movie than was necessary, which is admirable and has frequently hilarious results because of how deadpan its approach is, and a lot of this comes down to the cast who are taking these roles mostly seriously. In an ordinary adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, you could imagine this being the cast, but you also have to believe them as zombie fighting badasses. That is not an easy balance, and the fact that so much thought has gone into the casting does speak volumes for the hidden nuances of the material. However, the surprising show stealer here is Matt Smith as potential suitor Mr. Collins. My goodness, is Matt Smith hysterically awkward in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
I must confess, Mrs. Bennet, the fairest wifely choices be right here in this room. I declare that I am enchanted by your daughter Jane, and request to speak to her alone, if I may.
Oh dear, Parson. I'm afraid Jane is already spoken for. We expect a serious proposal imminently.
Oh, fuddle.
But the issue with this concept was always going to be whether or not the movie could sustain the joke the whole way through, and unfortunately, this is not the case. Once the third act rolls around and the movie starts to deviate significantly from the original source material, it runs out of momentum, and this is mainly because it has followed the structure of the original Jane Austen novel so closely that plot elements that need to come ahead towards the end either come out of nowhere or need to stop the natural progression of the story so they can be introduced. The movie also includes a subplot where the zombies are slowly growing in intelligence and are organising their own religion and culture, but when everything is said and done, at the end it still boils down to them being mindless hordes. At first I thought the movie was making some sort of commentary on the rich aristocrats using their wealth to afford the amenities and training that keep the zombies at bay as an allegory of classism in the 19th century, but the further the movie went on, the more it contradicted this thought process, and it became clear that the zombies are just a MacGuffin disguised as a horror trope. At 108 minutes, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies actually suffers the same issue as the original Jane Austen book. It's too freaking long, with an elongated third act that doesn't really add anything to the prior established themes. And then you have the neutering of the gore and horror elements that is basically the one thing you need to get right in a movie of this type. Yes, some of the makeup effects are strong and there are one or two gruesome images, but when it comes to the violence and the action, the movie cops out in spectacular fashion. It opens with a strong throat-slashing scene that actually takes place from the point of view of the zombie, but after that we see a woman get her head shot off by a musket, and instead of a skull explosion, we get a pathetic pink dust cloud. Limbs are chopped off, but there's no blood. There are stabbings, but the swords are clean when they exit the wound. We hardly see zombies actually eating people. The list goes on. While Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter had CGI blood, which isn't nearly as good as the practical stuff, it at least lived up to its obligations for the genre. This does not. It's clear that it's been cut for a PG-13 rating in America, but in the UK, it's rated 15. I've seen 12A rated movies gorier than this, so why the higher age rating for what is the same movie? And just going off topic for a moment, at time of recording this, I've seen Deadpool. Deadpool is a 15 as well, and Deadpool completely beats the stuffing out of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies in terms of earning its 15 certificate. But apart from that, the costumes are fine and the locations are appropriately lavish as we spend a lot of time inside the houses of wealthy aristocrats. There are a lot of extras and the aesthetic at play in the opening credit sequence is really novel. As I mentioned earlier, the production design concerning the supernatural elements demonstrates a lot of creativity, and while composer Fernando Velasquez is mainly known for doing horror movie scores, he does manage to combine period romance motifs into the mix to make the genre crossing work. So after all of that, here's my conclusion. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is basically the opposite of what you'd think it would be. It's a movie with a lot of brains, with clever world building, strong casting, and a great deadpan approach to parroting Jane Austen's original novel, but centering it around zombie outbreaks and action set pieces to the point where I can imagine fans of the original text being the ones to get the most enjoyment out of it. But it's a movie with no guts, as the obligatory gore and violence on display is tepid at best. It feels like a neutered cut of the film to appeal to younger audiences, but by doing that, it undercut its own premise, along with an elongated and poorly handled third act. If an unrated cut comes to home media, I would highly recommend the movie, but as it stands right now, it's just a fun, schlocky time at the movies that's also a missed opportunity. I give Pride and Prejudice and Zombies 3 stars out of 5. Oh yeah, and stay through the credits.
And I asking by vengeance.
I shall never relinquish my sword for a ring.
Never comes our way.
For the right man, you would. The right man wouldn't ask me to.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to my review. You can find these reviews a day early on my website, so be sure to visit www.trilbee.com regularly, where you can find a written version. I'm just experimenting with a new format, so let me know if you like these audio reviews to complement the written ones. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. But more importantly, what do you think of the film? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to subscribe for more movie-related analysis. Please hit that like button, as it really helps me out, and you can support my content through Patreon for exclusive perks and rewards and updates. I'll see you folks next time.